False Skies. False Skies is an RPG released in November of 2022 by Phoenix. And let me tell ya, if you're looking for underrated and unknown turn-based RPGs, then gamer, do I have a treat for you. False Skies sees us in a world prospering with that of archaeologists and those seeking to discover and learn more about the past. We find ourselves as the newest member in an exploration society of the nearby city of Mapor, led by homie Mary. Hi! That's me saying hi to Mary. You can say hi too if you want. The group recently just found their way into the ruins of a place known as Lettergarm, with our journey starting by exploring these ruins and retrieving artifacts and the like. However, not long after this, does the world itself seem to be undergoing great attack, as communication towers are being destroyed, a strange group of horned people from a once thought lost civilization making their appearance with goals unknown, and alongside them, an appearance of a forgotten city rises to see the stars once more. So right off the bat, if y'all haven't noticed by now, this game's art style is amazing. It's purposefully reminiscent of that of the Game Boy Color. There's a couple of reasons I decided to play this game when it was first suggested to me by gamer Grumia, and one of them was that a Game Boy style RPG with a focus on character customization is exactly what I'm currently interested in looking at. I love the art style of the Game Boy Color, the kind of environments and areas that it can create. I think there's something really special about this style. It's always hard to tell if it's just nostalgia speaking, but I do think there's a certain tone unique with this style and sound. There was so much care put into the hundreds of enemy sprites, character sprites, changing depending on the predetermined look you choose and their class, to even all the locations, which, while they do start out relatively samey to one another, the player ends up going to some truly cool looking places. And with the limited Game Boy palette giving each location a distinct color, alongside the sprites themselves being very expressive, from the different characters that you meet having portraits to even the little animations that these characters do, Phoenix was not limited at all by these small sprites. Matching the art style is the chiptune tracks that fit in perfectly by the likes of Hazel, Steve Apoc Lakawiz, and Artemis Benya. The OST has been uploaded to Bandcamp, and I'll link the individual pages in the description. This soundtrack is fantastic, though the length of this game does mean that you'll be listening to some of these tracks for hours on end. Even when I wasn't playing this game, I had all these songs stuck in my head, not because I love them as much as I've been just hearing them for hours now, but I suppose that's a pretty normal thing for this genre. And despite all the hours, I still think that one of the cave themes is really great, and perfectly hits that vibe of exploring an unknown location. Like, I'll take this kind of cave music over quiet, forgetful droning any day. And that's not a roast towards my homie Cave Dweller Concert. That song builds up to something beautiful, but just think of the typical cave song in a game and you get the vibes. I feel like there's a stigma in RPGs and games in general that caves are just boring, uninteresting places, when there are many games that show that you can make them cool in a lot of ways. But yeah, every song in this game is pretty memorable, and I enjoyed them all. But now we get to the gameplay. I think in some ways, the gameplay may be the most important part of this game, given that this game has a pretty decent length to it, taking me around 40 hours to complete, which for a game mostly made by one person is very impressive. As y'all can tell, this game is a pretty traditional turn-based RPG, with a pretty interesting battle perspective with both the enemy and the player party facing each other and animating. It's pretty cool. But it is what you would imagine. You input everyone's actions, then they play out alongside enemies with priority given to those of the highest speed. There's spells that cost MP, equipment, items, experience, leveling. Encounters themselves are handled with an encounter bar, which is something that I'm starting to see surprisingly common amongst games with random encounters nowadays. some sort of indicator letting the player know when they are coming. There's no fixed time before an encounter, in fact it's random. Entering a map, leaving a battle, the encounter bar doesn't get reset, it just gets placed at a random amount, meaning you can still get comboed by one fight after another, the only difference now being that you know it's going to happen. It is nice because at least before an encounter I can heal, because I'm one of those people that after a fight I just don't heal and I keep moving on. I don't know, I've seen other people act this way too, but regardless, if you see any footage of just me entering and exiting an area, it's because I'm reloading the encounter bar to be more favorable. While you may think that this can make the game pretty spammy with encounters, it actually does something to mitigate this. Repels. They're cheap too. There's no inventory limit, so by the end of this game, you can definitely just have an infinite amount of them. And this created a balance I really liked. One thing I enjoyed about, forgive my language, on-screen encounter games, is I get to choose if I feel like fighting an enemy by walking into them. The game leaves it up to the player to determine how much XP they think they need, and while that can be dangerous, I appreciate it. I'd arguably say this idea gives the player even more control, basically just an option to turn off random encounters, and one that becomes easier the farther into the game you are, where you'll have more money to spend. Though with all that said, there are actually on-screen encounters, but these are fairly rare and represent more powerful enemies that you typically want to avoid, but you know, my ass is always ready for a challenge. And this shit ain't RPG Maker either. You can't do that thing where you can walk past entities while they're also transitioning between tiles. If you're anywhere near these guys, your ass is getting put into the encounter. And sadly, this game doesn't have escape iframes, so running away from these enemies can often lead to you getting encounter locked with them. Which is funny because these are the kind of enemies that you would want to run away from. Escaping is a low priority action as well, which means every escape attempt begins with you getting smacked up. So overall, as of now, this is sounding pretty standard. What's so interesting about this game compared to other RPGs? Well, how about the fact that there's over 40 classes to choose from? The player's crew is made up of expedition members they hire, as in, you create the characters. While there are some different designs, the most visually prominent choice of customization is the character's color. The real customization comes with the classes they can be turned into. Every class has unique level growths, a special command, skills they learn by leveling up, alongside weapon and armor proficiencies. The more proficient a character is with certain equipment, the better the stats gained from them, to the point where if a character has an E rank in any type of equipment, it actually hinders them, and that's pretty cool. One detail I really love about the proficiencies is how certain classes will have S rank proficiencies and weapons they would normally be E rank in. For example, I have this character who is currently a Shadow Mage, which is a mage focusing on dark and light magic, or Lux magic. And while the class would normally suck with guns, this gun I have on them deals Lux damage, and so they're able to use it as if it was an S rank weapon, which is a really cool detail that gives more identity to some classes. But I know what you're thinking. So there's over 40 classes, I make my 4 characters, and over the course of the game, switch into all the classes, and boom, I'm a Final Fantasy V gamer. And no, you aren't. First of all, outside the starting classes, the rest of the classes are locked, needing the player to complete certain side quests, advance through the story, or talk to specific NPCs. Some of these classes have multiple NPCs that will give you the unlock, but most of the time, there's a specific character you need to talk to. So you really should just be talking to everyone. But the main reason you can't switch into every class is due to the tier system. Classes fall into one of 5 tiers, and when you change class, you have to advance to the next tier, which creates a sort of tree of possibilities that you can evolve into. So if I start out as the tier 1 fighter, when I evolve, I can choose to be a tier 2 pugilist, and that would be the only tier 2 class I'm allowed to use, because you can only use one class in each tier. You also need to be a certain level in order to move on to the next tier, and changing classes retains your current level, and you can check on a character's status page to see how many levels they have in certain classes. What makes this interesting is all the questions it asks the player. How long do you want to stay on a class? Want to wait to learn all the skills, or invest into the next tier of class so that you can have much better growth and get a stronger statistical character by the late game? And more importantly, what kind of class combination should you be making? There isn't always a straight path like, oh, if I'm making a healer character, I should just go healer, super healer, ultra healer, etc. For one of my tiers, my healing character dipped into the chemist class, which I chose because it had the highest recovery growth, which is a stat that affects healing skills. Though part of me in hindsight makes me wish that I dipped my healer into the class that gave group buffing spells. And what this results is multiple kinds of characters. Do I want a fighter that can also heal? What about a healer that can cast magic? A magic user proficient in both buffing allies and debuffing the enemy? The skills you gain from each class will transfer to the next, creating these building blocks leading to thousands of different possible characters. For example, check this. I had a damage focused melee character that went from fighter to pugilist to samurai. So they were sturdy and pretty powerful. However, I had another character that started out as a fighter, but then switched to a dancer and then a samurai. Dancer is cool because that class has a number of luck-based attacks, as in attacks that can hit 2 to 5 times. Samurai is a class that can swap into different stances affecting their stats, which means I could combine the two and make a pretty fun RNG-based attacker. And because I chose dancer instead of pugilist, this samurai ended up having higher speed than the pugilist samurai due to the levels I gained in dancer, creating a very different flavor of character. At least, theoretically. Yeah, let me shoot a negative real quick. After a battle encounter, party members gain XP. This includes reserve members not currently on your party. Unfortunately, I find that they gain so little XP that they become pretty underleveled, to the point that where by the end of the game, I felt like I just couldn't bring them up with where my current party was without grinding, which is problematic on its own because if you're trying to level up these characters and they do die, they get less experience at the end of combat. Which, side note, I do actually like when RPGs make the XP split like this, give some advantage to solo character challenges and the like. But at some point nearing late game, you sort of just have to accept that your current party is the one that you're going to be running with, which sucks because you might not entirely like your current party due to the mistakes you made earlier on when you didn't quite have a grasp on the systems at play. It's a very hindsight-ish 2020 game, but would make a more planned out second playthrough pretty fun. My main example is my healer character, which, because I didn't quite understand how evolving worked and didn't know about the level skill list the player can view, I accidentally evolved off the base healer class before I got the upgraded version of the heal all skill. And by the time I realized this, I felt it was too late to just make a new healer. Which means up until the end of the game where I eventually did find another class with that ability, I just had this shitty heal all skill that wasn't that useful, but you know, at least it didn't cost a lot of SP. I don't think it's the biggest deal. I mean, if you F up your party that badly, there's an easy and very easy difficulty that you can just swap into. This game really isn't that sweaty though. If you've played a single RPG in your lifetime before, I think you'll be fine. If anything, this system is really cool, and adds a ton of replayability to this game. Like, hell, I don't even think I got to use half of these classes. And if I ever do play through this game again, yeah, I'll be down to try a completely different party setup. And with how varied the enemies and bosses are, it's always cool to see what you currently have to be able to use against all these encounters. There's quite a few classes that interact directly with enemies, from stealing loot, stealing their stats, skills having bonus effects depending on if their stats are higher than yours. Hell, there's even a class that does a ton of damage depending on the enemy species, which you have to guess. And that's pretty cool to attempt to identify them. It makes you interact with the world. Though, with that in mind, I think I can empty out the rest of my sorta negative thoughts on this game. I feel like some classes individually on their own are sorta questionable. Like, chemist? I don't know, bruh. Due to how multi-classing works, no classes are really bad, but it's like, Chemist is all about using battle items, items that deal damage, with the class dealing more damage with items every level. Sweet, that sounds cool. That's me when I first turned into the class. But it's like, yeah, they do more damage than my other characters with items, but they're only doing like 200 damage. Meanwhile, my party is hitting 3000 damage attacks. Even the stronger items didn't seem too great. Of course, there are the end-game items that deal cracked damage, but I think they do crack damage with anyone. I got like 15 or so levels in before I dipped. Maybe one playthrough I'll just sit on this class for the whole game and see what happens. But besides defeating high defense enemies, I just find them to be a weird stop in the road of life. Like middle school. Not that big of a deal, I was only in it for the recovery stat. And I mean, if there's over 40 classes, there's bound to be ones that are stronger than others. What matters more to me is if they're fun. And I just wasn't seeing the vision with Chemist. But I did enjoy all the other classes I used. A lot of them had some pretty interesting ideas. Oh my god, I completely forgot to put this in the script. Hey, is all fire good? Like, I had this skill on my elementalist class called all fire, and I low-key just wasn't sure what was going on when I was using it. Because it's just a skill that does 2 times damage on either your skill or your attack stat, depending on which one's higher. And it strikes all enemies, just 2 times damage, fire. But then I'd be using this skill and it's just dealing damage cap to enemies, like what's going on? And then those same enemies I hit with a 2.5 times damage magic fire skill, and it does less damage. Like, is this ability like glitched out or something? It was cracked, but only sometimes. Very, very mysterious skill that all fire is. Maybe I couldn't quite read the description well. I want to know the history on that one. Anyways, my next complaint is towards the equipment of this game, notably the weapons. I know this is a pretty common thing in most RPGs, but I wish the weapons didn't just end up being stat sticks. I mean, the only time I found myself using the standard weapon attack was during the early game, where MP is low and it still did damage worth a damn. Early game is also where the more weapon specific qualities come to play, such as whips and heavy guns being able to strike all enemies, though you don't really get heavy guns in early game. However, by the mid to end point of the game, all weapons sort of just become the same, just whatever gives the best stats, because by that point you're just using skills every battle. Sure, maybe like one boss fight I ran out of SP, but there are items, albeit rare, to recover MP during battles. There's so many weapons and it kind of sucks that by the midpoint, besides the stats they give, they really stop mattering. Like, I don't know, it's weird that when my gunner character stepped into a class that was horrible with guns, I was still using gun-based skills every fight, when I didn't even have a gun equipped. Though on the real, that'd be like the most anti-fun thing if you needed weapons for certain skills. But I just wish there was something to give these weapons more purpose than just being another piece of equipment. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. Once again, not a major deal. My last issue with this game is one that can be mitigated pretty easily, but it's the speed of battles. This game is very fast paced. I'm not lying, the average encounter for me was like 5 to 15 seconds at most. And that's because every fight was just me dialing in a skill I had called W shot, which really lives up to its name because it cleared most groups of random enemies. A majority of footage for the battles in this game I have is just me inputting W shot. There used to be a part of me that liked fast encounters in RPGs, even striving for it in projects. But I think nowadays I prefer longer encounters that are more thought out. Because I was sad that for a lot of the False Skies, I didn't get to use all the cool skills. Like, Samurais had all these cool stances, but that takes one turn to activate the stance, and the next to actually use an attack. And that falls in line with a lot of skills. Which is a shame because boss battles are great. I found myself doing all sorts of cool strategies, from buffing the party, using a skill to remove buffs off an enemy. Like, there was so much more than just W-shotting. There is a solution to this, of course, which is upping the difficulty to hard, where I imagine the enemies are more balanced for multi-turns. I mean, the game tells you later on that it was balanced with hard mode in mind. I tried hard mode for a bit, but then ran into a boss that killed me, and I low-key crashed out. I was also scared of longer encounters with the fast encounter rate. By this point, I was already tweaking because I hadn't uploaded anything in weeks, but with the use of repels, we can kind of get that less encounters, longer fights deal. I don't know, that's definitely something to try on a second playthrough. And thankfully, everything I just complained about in terms of encounter length changes by the midpoint of the game, which is generally where I really began to enjoy the game from nearly every aspect. The story gets hyper, the areas get cooler, and the encounters do get longer. If I ever play this game again, I'm curious how hard or any of the unlockable harder difficulties will play. Ooh, let me tell you all about the dungeons. These dungeons are kinda wild. I'm talking False Skies Maze Madness. Dungeons have the scale of either being a box standard maze with differing paths for chests, to having these wild ass mechanics that completely reshape the dungeon. It's pretty damn cool. I'm not joking though, I got lost for hours in some of these. My sense of direction isn't great, and one dungeon really effed me up. Besides the godforsaken seasoned gimmick garden, this was the only other dungeon I had to look up a map for. Mainly because I missed a crucial key item that the game doesn't let you know you missed before allowing you to proceed to the next steps. It's a whole thing, I'd have to explain the dungeon mechanics. Speaking of maps though, heavy shoutouts to SD Max 300. An absolute legend and champion of this game, having extremely detailed guides for all the classes, their mechanics, including hidden ones, unlock conditions, an overall guide of the game, and even maps for every single area. There's even these cool ass interactive maps giving you details of what to do in every location that I didn't even know could be done on this site. The amount of work SD Max 300 put in is very appreciable. And I'm glad that they found a game that they loved so much. Total legend. Overall, it's still a pretty fine battle system. Even if I really just had two strategies, one for bosses, one for regular enemies, just dialing the same inputs in over and over. But it's everything around the battle system that makes it better. All the cool classes and class mixing, the different equipment options, the add-ons especially had me thinking, and the great world map that, while starting pretty closed off, eventually allows the player to fully explore it, with plenty of side quests and optional areas to go to, that often reward the player with a new class to try out, which is always valuable. But this battle system for 40 hours? I'm not sure. But with this game's story, I am. The story of False Skies does start off a tad slow, with you basically just running errands for a bit. But once it gets going, it really doesn't stop. It's not just the story, it's the world. I actually kind of love how this game captures that feeling of adventure. The party goes on so many adventures through so many areas and meet all these one-off characters that are important in their own right, but as we explore farther across the world and see so many more people, we really start to feel the scale of this place. As silly as it sounds, it makes this game feel pretty realistic. Like, yeah, in real life, we would be going to all these places, meeting important political figures, mysterious people with their own motives, personally bear witness to events and get pulled into our own. But those people of power and wisdom still stay in their place when we leave, with their own goals. There are so many characters in this game that have great importance for the moment, that you then just never see again. And I love that. I love that I can barely remember most of the people you meet just because so much happens on this journey. And it makes those rare moments of seeing those people once more, after like several hours, pretty cool. It gives a sense of scale that while we were separated from these people for so long, they've been doing things on their own, and it's nice to catch up with them and see what they've been up to. The world just feels like it's always in motion, with all these characters running around and doing things. Sometimes we have chance encounters with them, while many other times we miss out. There are substantial plot points that we're only ever told about because our characters just didn't get to see them. And that's the kind of stuff that makes the world feel so big to me. There is a lot of depth here. False Skies captures that feeling of a journey in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced in a game.
And this sense of journey is also represented in gameplay. There's quite a couple parts of the game, such as when you first get access to the boat, where the game's like, okay, go find out what to do. And the progression is purely left up to the player to discover. And I love that, because here I am now considering what I should do and plotting a course of action. Now that I have the boat, I should be checking around the coasts of these continents, traveling around and constantly checking my map for potential locations and then discovering new things. Like, shoot, it really made me feel like I was an explorer. And that's so much cooler than just having a character tell me where to go. We are playing as a group of Exploration Society members, and it's nice that the game doesn't forget that sometimes it's up to us to make the effort of discovery.
And the fleshed out world is one that truly reflects the amount of passion and care put into it. I'm not trying to spoil too much, but there's a part of this game where you suddenly have to deal with a whole nother currency with its own rules, and that's a pretty substantial amount of the game. And goddammit, if we're talking about spoilers, can I speak about these 4 already? Take a look at these 4 horned people we've been seeing, my garmers. When it comes to stories and games with silent protagonists, one way this is typically done is sort of just letting the playable protagonists be spectators to the real main characters. And if there are any group of characters that I'd say are the main ones, it's these 4. I mean, 5 I guess if you include Nax, but bro wishes he was on the team. That's all I'll say. He's not him. Well, he kinda was, but the ending? Bro really thought. But yeah, Monto, Mo, Ferris, and Lys, or Lys. I love these 4. Just a great group of characters that, even from the sidelines, we get to learn slowly about them, and see how they change and grow throughout the game. And even back then, I was totally chill with them. Like, my group was sent to stop them, and they're like, you trying to scrap? And I'm like, nah, I'm chilling. Like, shoot, where are we going to next, gang? I think that's why I like the second half of this game so much more than the first, because we do get to directly follow these 4 around and learn more about them. It's weird, but it makes me forget that I'm a group of 4 Expedition Society characters and not just these 4 with their story. Like, when I think about the story of this game, my characters disappear and it's just the journey of these 4. But yeah, dope ass characters. Lys is my boy, favorite one, but Ferris is probably the best character in the game. I mean, she's even the game's icon, though Mary is the character on the banner art. I love these 4, but there's plenty of strong characters like the Emperor or Alma. What the game sacrifices in terms of a central cast is in order to create a fuller world of many interesting characters, and in essence we really do play the role of our main characters, exploring and discovering a world and its people. False Skies is truly an impressive video game. A 40-hour journey that's so content-rich with characters, areas, and player customization. But it's not just the more notable things I've pointed out. Phoenix even nails down the small details that I love, from the bestiary details for every enemy, the aforementioned alternative currency, to all the well-written NPC dialogue that also talks more about the world and the secrets hidden within it. That also changes pretty commonly to reflect what's happening in the world currently. To even the logbook. I haven't even talked about the logbook. Logbooks serve as the save station, and upon loading your save, you can see your character's last log about the current situation. And there has to be hundreds of these. For every minute step you make, there is a new one always letting you know what's currently happening. Hell, there's even logs for when you get beaten by a boss and you reload your save, which is wild. Not to mention boss encounters all having unique dialogue for fighting them again.
Or how about all the different battle backgrounds? You really don't notice them, but I swear there has to be hundreds of these. Every location and even sub-areas have their own background. Hell, even the world map has so many. From getting an encounter on a forest tile, a swamp tile, the very thin road tile, desert tiles. Hell, I swear there's even a unique background just for getting an encounter when you're next to a town.
There are thousands of games made by teams of hundreds of people that would never even think about the smaller details like that. And the fact that this is Phoenix's only game, released on Steam of course, going to their itch.io reveals that they've been making an F-ton of RPGs over the years, and yeah, the experience shows. Nowadays, they're already out here cooking up their next banger of a game, which after playing False Skies, I'm all here for seeing what they'll make next, and maybe even what they've made before. I always love looking at games and being able to see the developer's intent and how they personally view and love a genre. And I feel like RPGs are one of the ones that I can gather the most from. Though maybe that's just because I love RPGs. I think that's something to consider whenever I'm talking about negative aspects of a game I played. It's just the ideas that I personally don't agree with, but ones that the authors of these projects do. I'm just pointing them out to showcase their viewpoint, while also giving my personal perspective on these certain mechanics and such. I'm not out here throwing games on rankings and ratings and such. I try my best to see all ideas from all sides, and any idea that I may think is bad is just one that I simply haven't understood yet. Anyways, you can tell it's late when I'm writing this down because I'm just ranting about random shit. So yeah, False Skies is a pretty fantastic RPG. I think by now y'all have made up your mind on this game, so consider grabbing it and supporting an indie dev making dope ass games. I mean, I rarely talk about game prices because I mostly don't care, but $9 for like 40 hours of content? Gamer? That's a fucking deal. But as for me, I've got places to be, so I'm gonna get in my Ginnagle Guap and fly on out of here. Pieces. Shoutouts to Ken Chiago and all my other YouTube members. I'm sorry y'all, this shouldn't have taken a month to release. This was a crash out month. I effed my hand up, part of my hearing got effed up, and I don't think it's ever coming back, but I've been trying to focus more and more on my current project. In fact, I told myself that after this video releases, I'm gonna start getting pretty serious on my work. I post little screenshots from time to time on Twitter, but the game is in far too early developmental phases to show anything substantial. It's gonna be a good bit, but trust me, I'm cooking. And hey, I'm not gonna leave y'all out when it comes to these videos. Thanks for sticking around and supporting me, y'all. It's nice to know I can still show people dope things.